and welcome back to another episode of the Alizee Yeezy Show. I'm your host, Alizee Yeezy, and today I'm joined by Millie Gooch and Kieran.
Hey!
Hello everyone, how are you today, Millie?
I'm very good, thank you. How are you?
Very good. That you all right?
Yeah, I'm fine,
good.
Thanks for checking in.
Just checking in,
Yeah,
just making sure
I'm
that
good.
you're all right.
As usual.
So, you're my guest today. How would you describe yourself for our audience members who are unaware?
Oh, so I am, God, this is an interesting question. An author and a founder of Sober Girl Society, which is the largest community for sober and sober curious women online. So that is, that's what I go with, I think. I don't think I've ever been asked to describe myself. People normally do the intro for me and I'm like, oh yeah.
Oh no, on
must
this
nail
show I'm
those.
just like, right, you got to do the work
go, you
yourself.
take
Then I'm just
it.
going to sit back.
You must nail
Had a
those like
busy
group
morning.
icebreakers that you
Yeah.
have to do, you know, where they're like, describe yourself in 3
yeah,
words.
that
And you're
I've
like, oh no, you'd
Give
be
me the
brilliant.
elevator pitch. Describe yourself in one sentence or less, like a Tinder bio.
Yeah, oh no.
That's what I felt like I was on a date there. Like, oh, okay, what am I?
Actually, more importantly, are you a slow walker or a fast walker?
Oh yeah.
Oh, I'm a fast walker.
Thank God.
Sorry.
I've got this new theory, but this is why I'm stressed out this morning. The slow walkers at King's Cross.
Oh, okay.
How do they even get outside?
Slowing you down even more.
Yeah.
I think it should, instead of the Myers-Briggs thing, slow walker, fast walker.
Yeah. In your
Yeah.
Tinder bio.
Okay, put that in. Fine.
So I just can swipe left immediately if you're
Okay.
going to put slow walker there. You know?
I'm actively prejudiced against... I have to say, like, if there's a reason you're a slow walker, if you're just a slow walker just because
Yeah.
you go outside, you just decide to be slow
Yeah.
that day, I'm prejudiced against that.
Okay.
But I'd like to dive into the
Yeah.
Sober Girl Society,
Let's go
what you
for it.
do. Can we go straight back to the beginning?
Yes, we can.
So when did you realise that alcohol was becoming an issue?
So, if we go back kind of even further, like when
Yeah.
I was younger, I didn't really drink a lot. So I did a lot of competitive dancing. I used to spend my weekends like training. So alcohol wasn't really like a thing in my life. A lot of my friends did the whole, you know, like 14, drunk at a park, white lightning cider. And I just kind of missed that completely. And then I'm an August birthday, so I'm like the youngest in the year. I turned 18 and then literally 3 weeks later went to university. So I had never really drunk up until that point. And then when I went to university, it wasn't even like a question in my mind of like, oh, am I going to start drinking? It was just like, I'm going to university, I will start drinking. I think the culture is so like, it's not even a question, that is what you'll do. I remember like the freshers pack when I got there had like a shot glass and there was like bar calls, so everything was revolved around alcohol. And I got several jobs. I got one in like a vodka revolution, I got one in a shop bar, I was like dancing on tables. I very much changed the way I was dancing at that point. And then I sort of just got really indoctrinated into this kind of like student boozy culture. So I went from pretty much a nothing drinker to someone who was drinking like 3, 4, 5 nights a week. And also my drinking was just, you know, go hard or go home. So it was very binge drinking. And I always say I never had that in between stage of like learning my limits, like, you know, even a couple of drinks at a family party. I just went from nothing to like proper binge drinking. And no one kind of saw that there was anything wrong with it because I was completely surrounded by other people doing exactly the same. But it kind of got to about third year where all my friends kind of started slowing down, started taking their studies seriously. And I was like, actually, all I want to do is drink. And I think one thing I realised, like, when I went to uni, I'd come from this like small town where, you know, everyone knew everyone and I didn't really have to meet other people and everyone was kind of on my wavelength. And then I remember I went to uni and like everyone was really cool and they'd like been travelling and were talking about their stories and their gap years in Thailand, and I didn't feel like I had much in common with these people because that wasn't really like my life. And I used alcohol really as a way to connect to people and to just, you know, be more confident in myself because I felt like such a small fish in a big pond when I went to uni. And I kind of realised quickly that alcohol made me really confident, you know, didn't really care what people thought. I was a bit of like a loudmouth party girl. And also it kind of tied in at the same time. Geordie Shore was massive at the time. It
I
was
used to watch
this
that
like,
too.
yeah.
Relatable.
Yeah. And it was kind of that like, you know, mortal mentality of like going out, just like being really raucous, like unashamed. And I loved that, and I loved being this like proper party girl who didn't really care what people thought. So then that kind of continued, and then it got to, I left university and I started working in PR, and then I started working in journalism, and the media industry is very booze heavy. I worked for a lot of companies that also looked after like booze brands, and this is kind of like when my drinking kicked up a notch. So I would, you know, go out on a Tuesday night, drink so heavily that I would fall asleep on the train, end up in like Dover, and then have to get like £200 taxis because Uber wasn't really big then, like back home. And just like I'd embarrass myself at work parties. I would always take it too far. I always wanted to be the last one on the dance floor. I always wanted the night to keep going. I was always like chasing something. And then kind of like my early mid-20s, I realised it was really taking a toll on my mental health. So I would really suffer from blackouts. I'm quite sure I was drinking at a very high speed. And so I would have nights where I would just not remember kind of like large portions. Hours sometimes would just go missing. I wouldn't remember how I'd got home. I'd wake up in places and be like, how did I get here? So then I kind of would suffer from this really awful hangover anxiety, beer fear. What did I do? What did I say? Felt so like I've been putting myself in really dangerous, vulnerable situations. But at that point, I was in my like early 20s and I didn't even think, oh, actually I could stop drinking, because I was like, everyone does it. Everyone goes out, the girls on Geordie Shore, they go out and they don't care about it the next morning. I'll just keep going. And it kind of kept getting worse and worse until I got to a point where I was just really depressed, really anxious all the time. And I would kind of go out on the weekend, completely like binge drink, wake up like Monday, feel, slightly better by Wednesday, Thursday, and then just go, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go out and get pissed again. And I was just in this cycle of drinking, being hungover, feeling really ashamed about it, and then just doing it all over and over again. And then I always say it was like kind of fate. I was on the tube to work one morning, deathly hungover, and I read this article in Stylist magazine from a woman called Catherine Gray, all about her new book that was coming out. My idol, I love her. And I read this kind of article and I thought, God, wow, I really relate to that. And then I kind of like boxed it up, didn't think about it, went out on a night out, just got horrendously drunk. I remember there was tequila. I remember I was in the smoking area and like that's about it. And then woke up next morning and said, I just can't keep doing this. I can't live like this anymore. I'm so miserable. I'm like wasting my life drinking. So I downloaded the book on Audible, and it just changed the way I thought about drinking completely. And that day I was like, I'm never drinking again. And my friends thought it was hilarious because, I said that 4,012 times.
Yep.
And that day something within me just like kind of knew that I had to change something. And that is kind of where the story began, really.
Was the book The Unexpected Joy of Being Sober?
It was, yes.
Yeah, 'cause I read that. I think I picked that up 2 weeks into my sobriety, and that carried me through my early sobriety. It is so amazing, and
incredible.
I would like recommend that book to anyone that's
100%.
interested in being sober.
Yeah, I used to
She's
think
amazing.
when people said that like a book changed their life, I'd be like, oh, you're so dramatic.
Shout out, yeah.
And then when I read it, I was like, it's changed my life.
Oh yeah, fully. And on that, I was just thinking earlier about how all of the writing I've read from sober people about being sober, it tends to be like the most raw, real writing I've ever read in my life. Like they really don't hold back.
No.
And I think it's so important, especially in early sobriety, to feel like so seen in your emotions. And it's very validating to like read someone else's experiences about it.
Yeah, 100%. I couldn't agree more. I think it just like, it felt like a topic that I couldn't really talk about with my friends either, because they just didn't seem to like feel the way I felt on a hangover. Like I would be ringing everyone like, what did I say? Was I embarrassing? Like, are you pissed off with me? Like all this stuff. And they'd be like, you were fine. Like, it's okay. Like, we're fine. No one kind of felt the way that I did about drinking. And when I'd say, oh, I couldn't remember this, they're like, really? You couldn't remember that? And it was only like after I started learning things about like blackouts, actually not everyone suffers with blackouts. Some people remember the entirety of their night, whereas I was like, I literally don't remember what happened from like 10 p.m. to like 2 a.m. And people were like, how? So they just didn't get it. And all of a sudden I was reading this book of someone and I was like, oh my God, she gets it. Like she gets it. And I think that was just revolutionary for me.
It's actually funny because I was living with a friend of mine and she was going through a breakup. And so she was in her room reading The Unexpected Joy of Being Single, and I was in my room reading The Unexpected Joy of Being Sober, and then afterwards we swapped.
Yeah. Both amazing books. Such good books.
Hitting all of the niches that you need,
I find it very interesting that you mentioned that you weren't one for the young teenage years drinking, because I thought like drinking in a park, drinking cider when you're 14 was ubiquitous with young British
culture.
Yeah. No, genuinely, because that's what it was like in my town. There's nothing really else to do, so I find it quite interesting. So how did that feel then, to go from not drinking to drinking like 3 to 5 times a week at university? Sure, that must have been quite a big shock to the system.
It was, but I think I'd always kind of like prepared myself for it because I just accepted that was part of uni culture. And it wasn't that I was like against drinking when I was younger and all my friends used to drink. They all did the like 14 drunk at a park, but for me it wasn't a thing. But I kind of always knew it was coming. It was just like I'd kind of delayed it, and you know, even in those like 3 weeks before I went to uni, I think started preparing my liver for it. Like I'd finally turned 18, I could go to pubs, and I remember like when I first turned 18, it was the day I got my A-level results. So we all went to the pub and I had a picture of Blue Lagoon in a Wetherspoon. So like, that was my like first legal alcoholic drink, was this like picture of Blue at like 10 a.m. So it wasn't like...
Used to love that one, by
the best, that and Purple Rain. And and I did, so it wasn't like a thing that I was like against or didn't want to do. I just hadn't really kind of like got round to it at that point. I always kind of knew it was coming. I always knew it was part of British culture and that eventually I would get there. I think I'd just been like too busy doing other things.
And now as part of Sober Girl Society, you have this like Sober Student Societies.
Yeah.
Is that why it was so important for you to target that demographic of students just because of your own experiences?
Yeah, 100%. So I first started kind of working with universities through Club Soda. So they said to me, do you want to come down and run pop-up alcohol-free bars in the halls of residence? And I was like, yes, I do. And actually, I was really shocked at how attitudes have already changed. This was probably like 2 or 3 years ago now. And already people were like slightly more open to it. I remember I was like serving, it was like a Budweiser, like alcohol-free, and this guy came over to me, looked like a typical, you know, like football lad, and said, oh, is that alcohol free? And I just got really defensive, and I was like, yeah, it is, and what? And he was like, oh, that's great because I don't drink. And I was like, oh, okay, sorry. And I just assumed that
like,
everyone
what are you
going to
do about it, buddy?
Yeah, so I kind of was shocked at myself because I was like, oh wow, like actually that's my own ingrained attitude that like, you know, uni students, that's what it is. And then I kind of started wanting to work with other people. So I did a lot of like shout outs on like, you know, are you starting a sober society at your university? I just started like gathering people together. It's not like an official thing or anything, but loads started popping up and I started noticing that. And then some people come to me and say like, I want to start this at my university and I don't know how to. So I would like link them in with the other people who had already started their things. So we've like kind of helped people do that really. So it's not like an official thing that we do, but I always like try and link people in together and say, well, this society has done it at this university, this is how they run it. And then like if they want helps with like drinks brands and getting things sponsored, then I'll like send them contacts for that and stuff. So but for me that was so important because I always say without university I think I would have always gone to drinking because I think it's just so ingrained in British culture, but I don't know if I would have gone to the excess that I did from going from university. I think
I do feel like that is a bit of a shift in people being more mindful of their habits and their substance use. But like you said, like the normalization of it is so huge and we're so socialized to think that like drinking is a normal part of social interaction that it's just still really difficult to break, you know?
Yeah. Oh, 100%. I think it's the biggest barrier I always say, I think, for people stopping drinking is actually like other people and like peer pressure and what they will think of it and how they're going to socialise with other people. When you actually take all that off the cards and you're like, could you just stop drinking? Like, if you didn't socialise, people are like, yeah, I probably could. Like, for so many people, it is that like bonding elixir. And unfortunately, that has come really down from the way alcohol's been portrayed, whether that's, you know, alcohol advertising, media portrayals. We just have this like solid idea, and I think especially for women as well, that like that's how women and men, but very differently. I think that's how you like you bond with your female friends. I think men have kind of like this different like pub lad culture, but I think in terms of us, you know, like rosé over dinner, that's like how we're taught that we socialise, and bottomless brunch, especially with this like rosé all day culture now. So I think it is the biggest thing for people, that they don't think that they could socialise without alcohol.
I was just trying not to laugh because I got a flashback then of having like dinner with one of my friends, and we were drinking a bottle of wine. She was a fashion designer. It was very like glam and nice, and we had a nice evening. And then I went out with a certain someone who's not listening and doing loads of gear in Dalston.
Oh no.
And it always, for me, it was always like that. Are you the type of person where, I think I know the answer already, one drink, it doesn't exist?
Yeah.
It's always just the
why
next
would
one, the
you?
next
Yeah,
one.
it didn't appeal to me. If someone said, oh, let's just have one drink at dinner and then go home, I'd actually say, I'd rather have nothing. Like, I'd rather have a water.
Yeah.
It wasn't necessarily the alcohol. It was that I was going to get absolutely blackout drunk from the alcohol. So for me, it was all about getting drunk. It wasn't, I really like this wine. It was, I really like being absolutely blackout drunk and like not feeling my feelings or not overthinking or all those things that kind of like came with it for me. So I think, I'm a one or not, well, zero or all basically.
And did you ever find in your early 20s when you were recognizing that something was going on because, like you said, your friends didn't get the effects from hangovers as much or whatever? Was there anyone that you could talk to about it, or did you ever get the response of, oh, well, you're 23, you don't have a problem, you're too young to have a problem? Because I feel like that happened to me a lot.
Yeah, definitely. I think when I spoke to kind of my friends about it, they were like, oh, it's like normal. And I kind of, again, like things like Geordie Shore were like my model of, where they would wake up, they'd all be deathly hungover, but they'd just get on with their day, and that's kind of like what I felt. And especially the industry I worked in, like a lot of people were hungover, so it was really normalised. So I didn't even feel like I had a problem. Like I knew internally that I wasn't enjoying it, but I couldn't kind of put my finger on that I had this problem. And also I think we have this idea of what a drinking problem looks like, this very stereotypical problem. You're over 50, you're like waking up putting vodka on your cereal and you're sleeping on park benches. So I was like, well, that's not me. So and that is, I think, a problem with our drinking culture is, people would say to me, you're not that bad. Okay, I'll keep drinking, and then when I am that bad, are you going to recognise it? Like at what point do you stop? I always use the analogy, like if a house was on fire and you go, no, it's only a little fire, we'll leave it, like, it's fine, and then the next thing you know, the whole house is burnt down. Like, at what point do you intervene? Well, really, as soon as you recognise the problem, as soon as you see that there's a fire, that's when you should kind of go, right, let's do something about that, because otherwise it's only going to get worse. But because we have this idea of like, well, we'll leave it until the entire house is burnt down, until you've, got a DUI, and until you've like lost your job, we don't deal with drinking problems. So I think it wasn't that I didn't want to speak to anyone about it. It was that I didn't necessarily even feel like it was a problem. I just knew that I wasn't enjoying it and it was affecting me, but it wasn't a problem.
I mean, for me, I was sitting in the house on fire.
Yeah.
And my close friends were saying, Kieran, your house is on fire. And I was going, no, the house isn't on fire, guys.
Just like, stove on, it's all
I'm
right.
just keeping warm. Like, get off my back, will you? If I want to sit in a burning house, just let me.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because I feel like we really do have this image of an alcoholic or someone with a drinking problem. And like, because we're obviously all young.
Yeah,
I'm 21. What are you saying?
Exactly. I do feel like it's harder to recognize from other people, but also from yourself, because that kind of aids in your denial, because you're like, well, I don't look like the image of an alcoholic.
Yeah.
But I mean, when I was in my very early sobriety, I was struggling quite a bit. So I decided to go to AA. And I couldn't find the place. It was an absolute mystery. I was like walking around for ages. I was like, I'm going to miss this AA meeting. I was like, maybe I should just go home and have a drink. And I saw like two like middle-aged blokes with like coffee cups. I was like, this must be the place.
So stereotypical.
But I was right. But once I got inside, it really was people from all different backgrounds, all different ethnicities, gender, and yeah, it was like amazing to see. And I don't know if either of you have any experience with AA, but there can be quite heavy like religious themes. So I sat down and I was like reading off the board these like 10 commandments or whatever they have, you know what I mean? 10 steps, whatever. And it was quite like religious. And I think the guy sat next to me saw that I had like one foot out the door. I was thinking like, this one's obviously just not for me. Like I'll find something else that's, for me. And he was like, hey, and he introduced himself to me. And I was like, I think I'm just going to go. Like, this is too religious. I really don't vibe with this. And he was just like, it's really not about that. Instead of like thinking about what's different, why not just sit and listen and hear what's the same? So I took that advice, and it's some of the best advice I've ever gotten because I stayed and it was like a really good experience and I felt very validated. And yeah, it's just, I feel like it's so important, especially in early sobriety, to see and be around and talk to other people who are also sober.
Yeah, 100%. So again, I had this idea when I first stopped that AA, I had this idea that it would be, all 50-year-old men with coffee cups, and I kind of thought they're going to laugh me out if I go in there and say, actually, I can go a couple of weeks without drinking, but when I do drink, I end up blackout in a place that I don't want to be, not remembering my night, and with the worst existential crisis.
Yeah.
So I didn't go. Now I have a lot of knowledge about it. I've got friends that have been through the program. I know so many people whose lives it saved, people who swear by it. It's free, which is incredible. So I would never ever bash AA just because I didn't do it.
Yeah.
But that was because of my own ideas that what I had. And then kind of when I started to meet people who also didn't drink or people who had been through AA, I was already kind of like 7-8 months sober at that point. So I was like, actually, I don't think I need it because I'm in a much better place now. It's not to say I wouldn't recommend it. It's always one of the first things I say to people if they want to go. And like you said, there's a mix of people. There's women's only groups, there's LGBT groups, there's everything that you could want. It's not this thing. But I think even the word alcoholic, I think, is a thing that puts people off. And I think that kind of language is also changing as well. So in medical literature, they don't really use alcoholic, they use alcohol use disorder.
Yes.
Because again, it's this idea of like, you're either an alcoholic or you're not. There's no in between. And because some people don't identify as an alcoholic, they won't accept help for their drinking. They won't go to things like AA because they don't want to stand up in a room and say, I am an alcoholic. So that, I think, is an important thing that we start changing as well, that actually understanding there's a whole grey area in between of drinking problems. You're not this one thing. And actually this kind of idea really benefits people like the alcohol industry, because it's this idea that, you know, you can keep drinking like a normal drinker because you're not an alcoholic, so that's fine. And it's also this idea that, like, people are born as one, and there is this like genetic component to addiction. But I always kind of think, like, if you woke up on a desert island and there was no alcohol and you didn't know, would you be an alcoholic? It's like this kind of real...
I'll find a way.
Yeah. I'll
Start brewing my own.
I'll find
the
something.
coconuts or whatever.
But to me, it's like a symptom of a much greater problem of what people are using alcohol for. Is like, for me, it was mental health. So I kind of used it to dispel anxiety and depression and things like that. So it's a really complicated conversation, but I think changing the language around that, I think, is really important, that it's not like an us or them. And also that anyone could become alcohol dependent. It's not like you're an alcoholic, so you will become, or you're not one, so you will, or like you could keep drinking and you'll never become one, because the reality is that you could. So I think changing the language around that is important as well. For some people, the label is really empowering, but for a lot of people, it also keeps them drinking and keeps them stuck because they don't want to identify with that label, because there's still a lot of shame and stigma around it.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because I remember when I was, I want to say 22 or 23, I went, quote unquote, sober for almost 2 years, by which I mean I wouldn't drink alcohol because I recognised, okay, this is a problem, it's going too far. But I'd still do a bunch of drugs. I'd still do like cocaine as much as I could, or MDMA, and rotted my brain that way instead. And I'd find when I'd talk to older people, don't want to say which gender, but a particular gender, if I'd talk to older people, oh no, I don't drink, no thank you, there'd be a lot of, oh, but do you have a problem? Were you drinking every day? You're too young to have a problem. Like kind of damaging, like sabotaging language. Ultimately, it didn't impair my quote unquote sobriety. I chose to start drinking again because I rotted my brain from like the MDMA usage and stuff, and I developed dissociation disorder. I couldn't deal with that. So I started drinking again because then I kind of felt like things were real when I was drunk. It's interesting the way the language is, because sometimes I felt like I don't mind the label addict, and I will say to people, oh yeah, I had an addiction problem, like I'm an addict, it's the dopamine receptors in my brain, there's something going on there. Sometimes I felt like I'd almost have to fight for that label from people because they would be dismissive and disbelieving, like, oh, but you're so young, how do you have a problem? Well, I don't know, it's my brain. I didn't wake up one day and decide to. It's just interesting to hear all sides of that, because I don't mind the term addict, and I didn't know it had changed to alcohol usage dependent.
I have read this.
Even the word addict, again, if that is empowering to you, then absolutely use it. I think another thing that people are kind of saying is, by using that like kind of one label, rather than saying like I suffered from addiction, saying you're an addict kind of will give that's your whole personality and that's who you are. And I think then people don't see you as anything other than that. You know, we dismiss people and we say, oh, they're a drug addict. Like, that's not who they are. They're a human being at the core of it. They have just suffered with addiction. But so that language can sometimes impact negatively as well, because we can be very dismissive of people, again, because of the stigma. So we'll just say, oh, they're an alcoholic, or they're a drug addict. So, and we don't help people because we don't see them as human. We don't humanize them. We just see them as this addict and this like idea of what we have. So I think that's another problem with the labels as well. But again, it's hard because you can't say to people, don't use this, because if that's empowering to them, then you should absolutely use that, and you should be able to fight for that label. So I think it's just a kind of wider conversation of changing the stigma around it.
In sort of like proper conversations, I want to say, quotes, I will usually say alcohol use disorder, because I have read that, you know, it's more applicable for everyone and like you said. But maybe this is a toxic trait of mine. My favourite party trick is if someone says to me like, oh, why don't you drink? Because people are so nosy about it. I will just be like as deadpan as possible and be like, I'm an alcoholic. And I will just kill the vibe in the room, and I do not care, because it's like, why are you inquiring into my...
No, I love that though, because after a while it does get really...
It's annoying,
I found
it?
I found it really annoying when I was in my early 20s. Now I don't mind. I just don't broach the... So sometimes I'd snap a bit. Like it's the same with being vegan, I think, because I did have someone say, "So why did you choose to go vegan?" And I was like, because I just give a shit about things that aren't me. It's as simple as that, really. You know, I do like that toxic trait of yours.
Thank you.
But
I think that's all about changing the culture, really, because that shouldn't be the only reason that gets people to stop asking those questions. It shouldn't be that is the only thing that you can say. It's either I'm pregnant or I'm an alcoholic, and they are the two only socially acceptable reasons.
I only have one option, unfortunately.
Try the other one. See how it goes
I'll see
down.
how I go.
But that the culture should be that someone should just say, I'm not drinking, and the response should be, I'm okay. If I said to you, why aren't you smoking? It's obvious why you're not smoking, because we all know it's not good for us. You don't need a reason like, oh, I'm pregnant, or, you know, I'm like that's the thing that needs to change, is the culture, so that you don't have to come back with that reply. You could just say, I'm not drinking, and that's cool. That's the end of conversation.
So you touched a little bit on the gender differences in how people drink, and sort of like the societal image of like men drinking and women drinking. Obviously we know like it's very important for women to have female only spaces for their safety, their comfort. Did you ever consider making Sober Girl Society open for everyone, or sort of what was the decision that led up to that?
At the time, I just thought, so for me personally, I'd had a lot of negative experiences with drinking too much, kind of like sexual experiences. And like you said, I wanted a really safe place. And the more women I spoke to, the more people who had similar things. So I wanted to create a space where they could feel really safe to talk about these kind of things, to talk about the kind of adverse experiences that they'd had because of drinking. So that was like number one reason why it was like a Sober Girl Society. I also thought that there was a lot I couldn't relate to in kind of like really lad heavy sports culture of drinking. And I thought, you know, that's not my experience. I don't want to speak for that group. So that was kind of like another reason why it was Sober Girl Society. Now I kind of wish I'd called it like Sober She's Gays and Theys Society, because I'd love, like, I feel like that would have been much better. And like, you know, my friend Scott,
I don't know if it has quite the same ring.
It does it? Like, I wish there was just something that I could like add on the end. But I always say that everyone is welcome if they do want to come.
I think you're reaching everyone as well.
We try and team up with, like, so my friend Scott, who runs Proud and Sober, so that's an LGBT community, we'll do events with them, so we can say that, you know, actually we're opening this up to more people. I don't want it to be like, if you're not a girl, you can't come, because I believe that everyone is worthy of help. And, you know, if men message me, I'm not going to be like, sorry, I only did with girls. Like, I can't help you. But I just think that there are a lot of difference, especially in those kind of like extreme ends of the like gender spectrum of like real lad heavy, you know, like drinking mentality. I think there are slightly different ideas. There's also this kind of like stereotypical idea that a lot of women drink for emotional reasons, so like stress, heartbreak, whereas men, it is a lot more about the kind of like bonding and the image and the like lad culture and not being seen as a pussy. So there's like there's kind of different ideas with it, although I think that has kind of like crossed a little bit over the last few years, especially with like women's drinking. I think it's got more where you could say to your friend, you're being a pussy, whereas I think like there are those kind of like ends of the spectrum. So that was really the reason why it was Sober Girl.
Yeah, it's funny actually, because I came out as non-binary like a few months into my sobriety. Probably another thing I was repressing with my alcohol use, like gender identity issues. And I feel like I didn't really fit in either of those categories.
Yeah.
I was like in my own pocket of like drinking a bottle of vodka a day. So maybe that's what like non-binary people with alcohol use disorder do. We just sit in our rooms drinking like a litre of vodka.
Can you start Sober Non-Binary Society? Because I feel like there's a need for
That
it.
would be great.
Yeah,
That'd be
it
so
can be
good.
an umbrella.
We
That'd
can
be
start a
great.
partnership.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, we'll discuss this afterwards.
Awesome.
When you were working in PR and journalism, were you working in London?
Yes.
Do you find that there's something in the water, well, besides all the traces of cocaine, there's
Yeah.
something wrong with London? Because in my hometown,
Do you wanna
there's
let-
something wrong with London. There's
Off the
cocaine
top of your
in,
head.
in the Parliament toilets. Like, it's
Yeah.
all over the place.
Yeah.
Don't drink the Thames water.
You should see one of my oldest videos on my channel. It's George Osborne clearly off his head. Remember him, old
George
Gideon?
Osborne.
Funny. Do you find that there's just something like next level about London? And because my hometown, we definitely had a drink and drug culture, definitely had a going to the pub culture. It was more in the countryside. But then come to London, it was... I'd done coke twice before going to London. Then my first 2 weeks, I think I'd done it about 5 times.
Yeah.
You know, did you find that...
So easy to
What are you
access.
laughing about? it was mad ones, mate. It was mad ones. It was before I knew you. It was...
Yeah, I think London in particular, I think there's a few reasons, like you probably could really track it to some different reasons. I think like, so where I actually live in Kent, when I would be at home, there would be times that I'd be like more inclined to drive or things like that. Whereas like in London, everything's so accessible by public transport, you never even have to consider that. You can get as off your face as you want and you can know that you can get home safely.
There's always an Uber.
There's always a way to get back. So I think that that's one thing. I just think, especially because, you know, it is like a centre hub for like people who work in finance and people who've got a lot of money. I think there's a lot to do with that. I think because we have this idea that actually drug problems are like for kind of like lower economy people, but it's not. Like actually when you look at cocaine use, it's kind of like the more money you've got, the more likely
rich
you
people.
are.
I've got some stories about that.
So I think that things like that help. Well, not help, but I think that's one of the reasons as well, is because there's so much money floating around as well. I think it's just so in the culture. I think as well, if I was at my hometown, I wouldn't necessarily do it because I'm like, oh, I could bump into so-and-so who I know or bump into so-and-so. Here, you're like, you could go on a night out and not see anyone that you know. So you're like, well, I can take more risks like that. I think there's probably so many elements that go into it that make it this like melting pot for drink and drug use, really.
On the point, actually, of, you know, the money and...
Yeah.
Like people in Parliament and stuff. Obviously, there's a bit of like a class difference in how people can recover from alcohol use disorder. Like having access to more resources, access to rehab, stuff like that. Was that something that you thought about when you created like such an accessible resource as Sober Girl Society is?
Yeah, 100%. I wanted like the majority of it to be free and available to everyone. So all the content, all the blogs, all the tips, everything is free. The only thing that we have is our events, which people will pay to come to. But we often do like mental health spaces, and if people can't afford and they want to come, like we're always open to say like you can come for free. Not now everyone's going to be like, can I come for free? But obviously we know that people are in different situations. So if that's really important, like we're always happy to accommodate that. But I wanted to offer a platform that literally people could access, and there's so many like kind of tips and even like podcasts and things like that I do that I know that people can access, and also like an ambassador for alcohol change and do loads with them as well because I know how important that is. But you're right, not everyone has the same access, and I think again this is part of the problem of like we're really happy to push people to drink until they get to a certain point, and then we kind of want to dismiss them. We'll be like, no, you're not worthy of help anymore. It's like this culture of like, you've all got to drink, but then when someone, you know, loses their job and then they end up on the streets, we're like, oh, they're just a homeless
like
person.
you got yourself here.
Yeah, with an addiction. Like you're weak-minded or whatever the thing is. We're so dismissive of those people, but we've encouraged that, and we're so part of the problem, but we're not recognising that because it's so in our culture that that's why so many people end up in the positions that they do. But then when they get to a certain point, we're like, no, you did this to yourself. Like it's so dismissive. So I think it is important that there are so many like free options available out there. But I mean, the one thing I always say is Sober Girl Society is not a recovery program. So a lot of people do it alongside AA. We are just a community peer-led support. So the only bit we really take from AA is the idea of meeting like-minded people, because I think that for me was the biggest game changer. As soon as I found people like you said who got it, whether that was reading it in a book or meeting people, that helped me so much. Like, even though my friends were really supportive, they didn't get it. I had no one to kind of say, actually, how do you go out on a night out and do it sober? Like, oh, all of a sudden, have you got all these feelings? And if so, how do you deal with them?
Yeah.
So like that for me was the most important thing. So it's community at its core. So at any point you can connect with other people on the platform, whether you want to come to like virtual things, whether you want to join in the pen pal scheme, like all of it's free that you can meet other people. So that's what is really important.
It's like a decade of repressed emotions coming up.
Oh my God, I had so much therapy when I
You
got
can see like the
sober.
tidal wave coming. You're like, oh no.
Yeah, but I know you kind of mentioned it. I really struggled with dissociation when I stopped drinking, like depersonalization, because all of a sudden I had all these really intense feelings that before I just kind of like squashed down by drinking. I'd just go out and drink. And all of a sudden I was just like, I don't even know how to deal with my own feelings. So I then had to go to like really intense therapy, like did CBT, and like had to learn how to like relax and unwind and all those other things that didn't have alcohol. Like that was such a big problem that I didn't even think was going to happen from getting sober. I was like, I'll get sober, my life will be fantastic, all my problems will be solved. And then I was like, I've got feelings and I don't know what to do with them.
It's a super learning process, like how to deal with them. And I feel like no one gets it unless you've been through it. Of like, no, guys, you don't get it. Like, I'm feeling emotions. Like,
these things called emotions, I'm actually feeling them.
Are you guys feeling these all the time? Because this shit is crazy.
I had that exact moment one time, I think 6 months into, because I've been sober for almost 3 years, 6 months into the real deal. No drink, no drugs, none of that. About 6 or so months. And I was just sitting there watching, probably Made in Chelsea, probably. And an advert came on, and it was a Macmillan cancer advert, and there was a young child in it. And when I tell you, I cried all night. And the next day I was like, holy shit, what just happened? What is this? And I had to learn how to deal with that, because I just thought, no, I'm a bit robotic and maybe even a little bit sociopathic, which is what like heavy cocaine usage does to you over time. It makes you detached from your emotions and not have empathy for others, you know. So I would have moments where I'm like, no, I'm just a bit sociopathic and everyone should grow the fuck up. And then 6 months into sobriety, I was like, Jesus Christ, now things really affect me. And I don't know, but I have like I think not a pride issue, but some sort of like, oh, I don't want to have feelings. Some sort of like, no, I've got to be tough and like weird, almost I want to say like masculine trait of mine. So it took me ages to be like, no, it's okay to feel like this.
It's
like,
really healthy.
Doesn't make you less hard.
The masculine urge to not have feelings.
Which that's weird in itself. I'd like to touch on something that I read in your book, the Sober Girl Society Handbook. And this, because I read this a while ago, but it's like ingrained, it like burned into me, because I was like, oh, because I think I felt the way you did. And it's about the sort of promotion of alcohol within the media, within TV shows. And you said in the book that Kristen Davis, one of the girls from Sex and the City, actually doesn't drink because she had an alcohol dependent issue. So she's been sober since she was about like 26 or so, and how it almost felt like a bit of a betrayal, because she's a main character on Sex and the City and they're always drinking cocktails, like having cosmopolitans, whatever. And I read that and I was like, oh my God, because I like Sex and the City too, and I was surprised by that as well. And then when you just noticed how much alcohol is in all of the TV shows, like How I Met Your Mother, the sort of their central perk is they're at that bar or whatever. What other shows? New Girl. I watched New Girl and they're drinking all the time.
It's everything.
What's that about? Why is everyone always drinking on TV?
And it does feel like a con when you really think about it, because they're not actually drinking, but our brains just can't tell the difference. We absorb these messages, and like I fully did with Sex and the City. I was like, cool, if I want to be like this cool, sassy, you know, writer living in like the city, I've got a drink with my girlfriends, and that's how I'm going to be cool and sexy and elegant and all these things that we just take on and fully believe. And then when you look at it, like I used to say in the book, all the champagne is actually ginger ale and all the cosmopolitans are actually cranberry juice. So it's like they're not even drinking like the real stuff. And Kristen Davis, who plays Charlotte, she never drank throughout the entirety of it. But you just fully believe these messages. And it's with so many of these kind of, you know, films like Bridesmaids and all these other ones that have like drinking, like what's the film about How to Be Single? It all revolves around alcohol. But really, these are like mega successful A-list people, a lot of whom don't drink and probably also wouldn't be able to have the careers that they do if they were drinking at the level that they are in these films. So it's really interesting, I think, how much we absorb. But I think a lot of this has come down from like alcohol advertising through the alcohol industry, because they thought, right, we need to sell a product. So how do we do it? And there's a really interesting quote. I think it's like, why don't the alcohol industry actually advertise using, you know, the people who are actually really consuming their product? Like, why is there not a picture of me drunk coming out of Oceana at 4 a.m, like stumbling on the floor, puking? And it's like, well, because that's not what they want to sell. They want to sell the glamour and the glitz, and that's kind of where it's all come from. But actually, what they kind of sell isn't really matching up with what we're all experiencing. But we're still receiving so many of those messages that that's what we're believing. So it's really difficult.
Like, excuse me, I got blackout drunk and my night was not as advertised. It was not a sexy fun time. Like, I'm throwing up.
Yeah, like I wasn't on a cruise drinking a martini. Like, what's happened?
Do you know what? It still does kind of get to me a little bit though.
Yeah.
In a weird way, because
Yeah.
when I do have that little addiction voice in my brain that's like, let's drink, it gives me images of like, you know, cool with a drink and, you know, so these social situations, and it's like, shut up. Like, it's not that cool. Like, come on, calm down.
It's not. It's the same with smoking. It's been so, like, the advertising, the marketing is so clever. The way that they, you know, first put it into the hands of people that we would idolise and that we would look up to, and it would be like, what is, when you really go into it, like, what is it about smoking that is cool? Like, nothing. It's not cool. But yet I still see a girl, you know, in Paris with a cigarette, and I'm like, oh, she's so cool. Yeah,
in black and white.
What is not cool? It's just that the images that we have been told to believe is that this is what is cool. So it's the same with drinking, and like, I still get it with that thing. And but when you really look at the reality of it, it's like, is it really cool? No, it's not.
No. So you have the Wake Up Club
Yes.
now as well, which that's all online, right?
Yes.
So how was it sort of like adapting to the pandemic and lockdowns and making sure that people can still like access resources throughout those circumstances?
It was a really interesting time, actually. Like, I think the pandemic was a huge kind of like social experiment in drinking, really, and noticing those kind of behaviours. So like at the start of the pandemic, especially like when we went into lockdown, I think so many people thought that it was going to be this like party. Everyone was like stockpiling alcohol. You like saw all the memes of like people just shoveling it into their trolleys. And actually, like, the platform was really quiet for a while, because I think people were like, I can have gin at 4 p.m. when I'm supposed to be working. So we were like quite quiet at the start, and then I think everyone realised that actually it's not really sustainable to have like a 4 p.m. gin every day. And I always say what I think is really interesting. Have you ever been in a club and you're like, you don't realise how drunk you are until you go to the toilet, and then you're like, oh fuck, I'm really drunk. I think people realised actually for the first time how alcohol was really affecting them, because they were at home, they were just sitting there, they weren't really doing anything. Every drink, you're so much more mindful of it, because you've not got like loud music, you've not got people dancing, you're not chatting. So you're really aware of how alcohol is actually affecting you. So it's like, oh, actually, this is making me feel a bit sluggish. Actually, I feel a bit sad. I feel a bit this. And I think people really started to realise that. So by the second lockdown, everyone was like, I'm going sober, I'm not drinking. So we were like, oh my God, we need to put on all these like virtual events, because people were like, for the first time, like changing their relationship with alcohol. And all of a sudden the platform was like flooded. So like this time, like last January, I think we had like 10,000 new people come to the platform.
Wow.
Like, it was just crazy. And I think the pandemic was really interesting in terms of people's like drinking habits. I think they kind of went like, everyone started drinking loads, and then actually everyone got really mindful. So I thought it was really important to like provide that space for people to connect. And again, it's just like a really informal thing. It's just like, come on, have a like little chat with friends, because I think so many like work things were revolving around like Zoom drinks. So I don't know about you, I did a million quiz nights.
I got tired after after like the second one. I was like, you guys go ahead, I'm not doing any more.
And everyone was like super boozy on those, so we just wanted to provide a space where actually you could go connect with people on a Zoom call and not have to get pissed. So that was kind of the reason behind them, and then people just started saying, actually, we really like them. A lot of people, we do a lot of events in kind of like big cities like London, Manchester, where that we know that people can get to, but you've got a lot of people who live out quite rurally, say like, you know, I don't have a single sober friend, it's like 3 hours for me to get to a meetup. So we were like, okay, we're going to carry on running them. Interestingly, we did one on New Year's Day, and it was our busiest by far, because people just wanted like start the day on like a good space, like dry January, and we had like full attendance. We like sold out for that one. So it was like, it's amazing that people still want to kind of like connect and carry on virtually.
I think the way that you talk about sobriety and your experience is really positive, which is kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to invite you on, because I think it's great, and I think you have a similar mindset towards sobriety as well. Does it ever, I mean, it is difficult, but I approach things from like a really
No, it's
negative
easy.
I'm really negative about it, but you know that I'm very negative about sobriety. Like every day I have a mood swing of oh, what's the fucking point? Might as well just get really drunk, do loads of gear, and
Enjoy those convos.
right. For me in those moments, one of the only things that genuinely really stops me, like genuinely, and I don't think this is a good thing, so I don't know if I should say it, is vanity, right? Because it didn't look great during that time, and I've done a lot of stuff to my face since then. I'm not gonna waste all this money that I've spent.
I was admiring your skin earlier. I was like, shit, that skin.
Oh, only concealer today. Only concealer. I'm doing this new thing.
You've
Right?
nailed
it.
Looks great, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How do you, when you do have those moments of struggling, how do you retain the positivity? I'd like to learn some tips.
Do you know what? I think probably from an outsider you would think I'm really positive, but I definitely have those moments as well. I think it's just like it's just a simple act of like weighing it up, really. Like, and I don't want anyone to ever think I'm like, oh my god, sobriety is like all rainbows and butterflies, it will change your life, and you're like, but for me it has only had more positives than it has had negatives. And it's, for me, it's just a simple scale of looking back at my life 4 years ago and being like, you know, I was depressed, I was anxious, I wasn't doing a career I loved, I wasn't getting outside, I wasn't like connecting with my friends, I had really bad relationships because I was just always drunk. And then looking at what I have now, which is much better in pretty much all of those aspects. I've got more money, I've got more time, I'm more productive, you know, just all those things. And just weighing it up and going, okay, well, clearly, like, that is the better one. Just being more rational about it is saying, like, that's obviously better than that. And it's not saying, this is so amazing and this was so terrible. Because obviously I did have good nights out, because otherwise I wouldn't have kept drinking.
Yeah.
But it's just going, okay, well, the clear, obvious choice is that this is better than this. And if I go back there, then I'm probably going to end up down there. So for me, it's just being really super rational about, okay, my life is better now. Why would I want to go back to a life that's not? And also just knowing myself really well and knowing that actually, you know, if I did go back, the first couple of nights out, I probably could have 1 or 2 drinks. And then the next night out, I'd probably have 1 or 2. And then the next one, I'd go, oh, I've nailed 1 or 2. I can have 3 or 4.
Yeah.
And then the next one, go in, I had 3 or 4. I can have 5 or 6. And then 3 months later, you know, I've hit rock bottom. And I kind of know that would happen. So I'm not under any illusion that actually I've like nailed this moderation thing. And I think there's a level of acceptance as well. I always say, like, I think for some people, like, a 1 day at a time mentality is perfect. And I use 1 day at a time in terms of like mental health and not getting too ahead of myself and things like that. But for me, I've just kind of accepted now I will never drink again and solidly just say it. And for me, that acceptance is like, shut the door, put it in the box, that's gone now. I think when you're constantly thinking, oh, today I might drink, or tomorrow I might not drink, or do I have one at my wedding, or am I going to break this in a year? You're still doing that mental gymnastics, and it's kind of like you've not accepted it. And even putting it with, like, in the realms of like having an ex-boyfriend, I think, you know, if you go, oh, maybe I'll get back with them, or maybe they've changed, or maybe they've done that, all the while you're still in that, you're never really moving on. So once you say, no, do you know what, actually they were really bad for me, and I'm going to find someone that's better than me, I'm going to say goodbye now, that's it, I'm not going to text them, I'm going to block their number, move on. That's how I kind of feel about alcohol. It's like, I'm done with it, that's it, it's not part of my life anymore, I've moved on. And I think that acceptance has been really helpful to not constantly have those like mental mind games. But just, you know, like sometimes I will scream into a pillow. Sometimes I will ring a friend and be like, this is fucking shit. Like, I think it's doing that. And having sober friends or people that get it, I think is really important for that, because they can fully talk you down, like you said, from a meltdown, that you have these conversations. If I said this to my friend, like, actually, I'm really not enjoying sobriety, if they're a drinker, they might be like, oh, actually, go on. Yeah, like, have one. It'd be really fun. So I always have those conversations with people who I know will be like, come on, remember what it was like. So I think that's a really important thing as well. But, you know, everyone has bad days, so I don't want to be like, sobriety is perfect, like I've got my dream life. It's not the case at all. I have to do a lot of work, especially on the mental health. I'm still in therapy, like all those things that come with it. I think that it's important to be realistic, but it's also just important to say, my life is better now than it was, and that's the positive bit, is better than it was, and that's what I want to go with. So
it's just funny that you say that, though, because I do recognize that my life now is so much better and so much more positive. But in my early sobriety, I've kind of accepted it now. But in my earlier sobriety, I did have this really weird attitude where if something bad happened, I would be like, what? Like, I quit drinking.
How dare you?
This is supposed to ever happen to me again. Like, the universe is supposed to deliver me good things because I've, you know, conquered this huge feat. So when, you know, my life didn't turn into perfect sunshine, rainbows, flowers, I was like, what the hell? Like,
Yeah.
I've been scammed.
Yeah.
So I think
This is gone.
that did make it a little bit more difficult
Yeah.
to stay on the path. But again, like you said, it's really just about weighing up the
Yeah.
pros and cons. It's like, do I want a hangover tomorrow morning?
Yeah.
No, I don't. Usually
Yeah.
that's enough, you know?
Yeah. And that's
So,
like
yeah.
you said as well, I think it's not linear. There's sometimes where I'm like, oh, I love being sober. Like if I wake up, it's a Sunday morning, you know, like I'm hangover free, I've got loads of energy, I make a little coffee, go for a little walk. I'm like, I love being sober. And then, you know, 3 weeks later, I'll be at a bottomless bunch of my friends. One of them will be like throwing up on the floor, and I'm like, why am I doing this? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. There's those like, or you know, I went through a really bad breakup like 3 months ago, and I think that was probably the closest of like having so many feelings that I was like, actually, I think alcohol could be the thing. Obviously, I was like, no, you weigh it up, you're rational about it,
Yeah.
and you're like, what is that really going to solve? When you're going to feel worse? When you're going to wake up tomorrow hungover? Like it's just doing like a cost benefit analysis, which sounds
Yeah.
really callous, but you just have to kind of be rational in your mind about it. But it's not linear. Sometimes I love it. Sometimes it's not the best thing ever. But on the whole, you weigh it up. I used to use like a Strictly Come Dancing analogy of like when I was drinking, my times I did used to have real highs, but I also had real lows. So I would either my day would be like I would give it a 0, or I would give it like a 7 or 8. Whereas now I'm
Do
like,
you hold up the card?
yeah, like 0, 7. And whereas now I'm like pretty much every day is around a 5, 6 or 7. Like it's very stable, very comfortable. I do have highs and I do have lows, but generally every day is pretty stable. Whereas before it was either I was really up or really down. And now I'm just content and coasting and enjoying life, and things are nice. Sometimes they're really good, sometimes they're a bit worse, but generally it's like a nice little smooth roller coaster as opposed to like stealth or
The
one of those.
security
Yeah.
is good.
Yeah.
You kind of know what you're dealing with
Yeah,
on a day to
exactly.
day.
Yeah.
The consistency and stability. Yeah, that is true. Yeah, days
It's
are more.
boring, but it's true.
Well, I listened to, there's a neuroscientist called Andrew Huberman, and I think I'm pretty sure he's sober, but he had a scientist on, neuroscientist, another one, to talk about addiction. And he said that a lot of people who suffer with addiction or dependency issues, they're looking for a super normal experience because normal life is boring.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, you just kind of have to accept that normal life is. I was listening to it and I was like, I know you're right, but why does it have to be so bloody boring? But we've only got a few minutes left, so I'd just like to know, what are the plans for 2022 with Sober Girl Society? Have you got any events coming up?
Oh, lots. Although, just for your other point, I would say this is why I've taken up really extreme things like surfing or like going on zip
really?
line. That's how I get my super normal, or like occasionally not paying for a 5p bag from Tesco. Like just getting that little like.
Don't look
I'm
at
going to
me.
do that. I'm just going to stop stealing all the bags.
Just there's ways that I think that you can still get high that don't involve alcohol and drugs.
Shoplifting.
That's what you have to. Yeah, I'm not
Shoplifting.
don't go to like kleptomania era. This is
It's
where
too
we're going. Yeah. But plans
Like a
for
raccoon.
just swiping everything. Plans for 2022, more events. I'd love to just meet more people. Like I think it's so nice now that we can actually do in real like life events again. So we're going to do like London, Manchester. I want to try and get up north, and also try and do some like Scotland, Wales. Try and get all over the place. That would be the dream, is just to connect as many people as possible, because I think so many people after these events are like, I met a friend here and now we're going to go for brunch together and we're going to do all these fun things. It's really like helped me in my sobriety. So that's like number one thing, I think. And just to carry on like pumping out like the tips and the content and just getting the awareness out there, trying to change the stigma around sobriety and make it a little bit cooler would be fun.
I think you're making it cooler.
Thank you. I'm actually not cool as
I
a
feel
person,
cooler
guys.
already.
So hip and funky.
Are you joking? You're dressed great.
Oh, thank
Fantastic. I'm like underdressed. I'm like,
No.
this is the same top I wear in every single video. Well, thank you so much for coming.
Yeah,
So,
thank
you for having me.
you.
It's so
socials
lovely.
to promote. Sober Girl Society
Yeah.
on what you on? You're on Instagram. I know this.
Instagram, yes. On TikTok, but I'm trying to figure out TikTok. It's
So are you.
yeah.
I've just joined TikTok.
Getting
Follow my
there.
TikTok.
Yeah.
It's not about me. Right? It's Alizee Yeezy show,
Follow
but it's
you
not
as
about
well.
me.
What else? And then we've got the website as well, which has got the blog. So there's loads of good content on there, like good roundups of like alcohol-free drinks. So if you're interested in joining like a sober student society, there's loads of good blogs on there written by people in our community. So yeah, lots of free stuff.
Thank you so much for being
Thank
here.
you
You're
for
wonderful.
having me. Oh, you're wonderful.
And
Thank you.
Millie's book, The Sober Girl Society handbook, full of fantastic information. I read it last year. I was rereading it again recently. Very
Thank
good. So
you.
make sure
That's
you
very
check that
kind.
out as well.
I blush when people say nice things about me. I'm like,
And that's all from us, everyone. Stop laughing at me. Thank you guys so much for watching. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, dislike, whatever. Follow us on Spotify, iTunes. I have a TikTok now. Follow me on TikTok for nothing probably. Make sure to check out Millie. Thank you so much for coming
Thank you so
down.
much for having me.
Thank you, Kieran, as well.
Follow
And
me on Instagram, guys. I've got nothing going on there, but feel free.
Kieran's Instagram.
Perfect.
Thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.
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 Well, 3 minutes to
good.
spare.
Right, should we go for a
Excellent.
drink?
Oh, yeah.
Go to the pub.
Let's go get leathered.